Eddie McLaurin, welcome to Living in the Scriptures Live. Today we are joined by Caleb and myself. Unfortunately, Brian could not join us, and nor could David. A little sad because I think David did a bang up job on Revelation chapter 6. It was the cry that moved history. And, the thing you know, that I took away was this idea that this was not the destruction of earth, but God's fulfillment of his promises. And the coming of the kingdom um, presses in or clashes with all the other kingdoms, and the kingdoms resist and do not want the kingdom of God to come in. And that's where we have all of the tribulation, the conflict, and it made a lot of sense to me. Um, Maybe a question that I might start off with is, how do we feel about that? Like, his he concluded with that idea of, do we prize what we have on earth more than what God's promises to come? And I had to actually wrestle with that. I was really pressed upon that, and just thought, do I prize that more? And how? Um, yeah. What about you, Caleb?
Hmm. It's a good question. I mean, you certainly have in the text, the call to come, um, and isn't that the call of God to us? Like, you're not wherever you are in this world. Um, you need to move toward. You need to come to God. You need to come to Him, because there's, if you were where you were at, God wouldn't call you to anything. If the world you're in is where you're supposed to be, right? But God has something
And
more, and
I
yeah,
think that's a great way of framing it, Caleb. Like, if you were to like your heart's deepest desire, how would you finish the sentence? Come blank, right? Like, come. What is it that you want to come in your life the most? Like, come lots of money, come a great
yeah.
job,
I mean,
come
I think about those things.
relationship.
Yeah, I
Pardon?
think I think about those. I think about
Yeah,
those things. I would
but the
be
deepest
lying.
desire.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I
Yeah,
said I didn't, you know, desire. If I didn't desire, great wealth from time to time to strike it rich. Like that's a real thing. But I think when I ultimately, even beyond that, I certainly want God's kingdom to come, because I've been around long enough to know that if it's not this guy running the show, it'll be the next guy. And if it's not this party, it'll be the next party. And there is wisdom to be, we benefit from leaders who have wisdom. We're supposed to pray for wisdom. We're supposed to pray for peace for leaders and those in authority. And I think that extends beyond government. I think it extends to our workplace. I think it extends to, every sphere of influence that we are under. We can pray for peace. We can pray for wisdom for those people, that they would have wisdom, that they would guide and lead well. Leadership everywhere is, yeah, it's in demand. There's a demand for good, wise leadership. Everywhere can use better leaders. I think it's hard to think of um, places that are leading particularly well, because maybe we don't. Maybe we always hear more about the problems. But in any case, my desire is for God's kingdom to come. When Christ's kingdom comes, and when people are, raised up in the kingdom, they govern themselves better, and ultimately God is governing, and God's heart is for freedom. God's heart is for us to be free from sin, free from the things that enslave us and keep us from
yes.
living to our potential as image bearers of God. And the promise that when God's kingdom comes is it will be like heaven on earth. It will be beyond what we could ever achieve without Him. Just the slavery and the bondage that comes from a life lived apart from God and without His wisdom.
And I think that's so true, Caleb. I think that's kind of that tension of the kingdom already and not yet. we get glimpses and taste of it. There's like a foretaste or a foreshadowing
Mhm.
of all that is to come. And when it does come into our midst, that's the best we can have, right? And we do desire great leadership. We do desire freedom, and that all things that oppress and take away life, because the kingdom is about abundant life, and that's what we should be for, without a doubt. But like you said, that question of like when we, our greatest desire, when we say, complete that sentence, come, is very a telling one. Maybe we could bring it down to earth a little. I loved how David framed it out and said, there's still things in this life that we look forward to, and things that we will miss if Jesus came back tomorrow instantly. And he named things like, seeing my kids grow up, seeing, vacations and stuff like that. Maybe we could just spend a moment. What are some of the things that, you would miss? Some of the things that you look forward to. And I think a lot of these things line up with the kingdom, right? Like, I don't think God is anti David seeing his kids grow up.
Oh yeah, no, that's
Uh,
that's such a ridiculous caricature that we get, I think, sucked into from time to time. Everything God made in this world is good, every single thing, and so just God's creation in all of its majesty and mystery and weirdness, it's wild. There are some theologians who would say that there are elements of God's creation that are perfectly good, but they won't pass into the next. They won't be there when God remakes the heavens and the earth. Some people, I mean, it's an open debate whether there will be animals in heaven the way that we understand them now. I don't know that's necessarily a rabbit trail you got to go down, but I think the thing to remember is whatever's not there, you won't miss it because everything will be better. Even if it's not there, it's because it's not needed. It's like, as hard as it may seem, I mean, my kids, as they grow up, there's toys that we retire, and not because we hate them, it's because you got to make room for the better stuff. And yeah, no, that I love. I mean, there's no marriage in heaven, and I love the fact that there's someone committed to me in this really special way. The love that I receive from my wife, and the care that I receive from her, and the attention, and I mean, she's not given her life for everybody in the world, She loves God. She loves me in a really special way, and I get to love her in a special way, and we get to enjoy. It's like, so that's something that's like, yeah, that's probably maybe one of the top things where it's like, oh, no marriage in heaven. Now that I've been married for so long, I mean, it kind of feels like that would be strange. But yeah,
yeah, I think you're right. Like when we talk about heaven, it's going to be so much greater than anything we could think of. Like even Paul says, I don't count my sufferings worth comparing to the glory that's going to be revealed. And he's saying, hey, I could suffer all sorts of things and it's still going to be better. But yeah, I think that is an interesting thought. And there are things definitely we'll look forward to, and a lot of it is speculation. What will heaven look like? I think it's going to be beyond what we could describe or imagine. But all the good that God gives, I like how you said that. All the good that God gives now will be a further extension. I even think about marriage, and I don't know what it looks like in heaven, but supposedly this idea that marriage is fulfilled because marriage was always a reflection of the relationship between Jesus and the church, and that will be fulfilled, and something about that will bring greater fruit and fulfillment and life than what our earthly relationship here now is a pale reflection of that fulfillment. Exactly how? Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, like you said, there are definitely things that I look forward to. I was going to actually mention, like, I would love to go to Moab and ride my bike.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Before I die.
Yeah. You know what? And
is that?
I mean, that's really important. Like, everything God made is good, and the experiences we have in His creation are all good. And we can kind of get narrow-sighted, or we can kind of miss out on that by focusing on Jesus and church. We can kind of psych ourselves out. And there's a reason why, honestly, there's a reason why secular people at times, they have a deeper curiosity of the world around them, is because they're not kind of shutting things down in ways that we can be a little bit more, because we're Jesus people, right? But it shouldn't be that way, because God should enhance every single area of interest in our lives. Should be enhanced by our knowledge of God. Our curiosity should be enhanced, and the fact that we will get to pursue this for continually. It's a whole nother discourse, I guess. I'm kind of getting off the rails.
Totally. No, I think that's totally has the thing. I once got in trouble for saying that I think that Christians should be the most thankful people in the world. And part of that is because we know who to thank.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if you're an atheist and you came from nothing, you go to nothing, you're just a jacked up monkey. Like, well, there's some gratefulness. I'm not going to say you can't be grateful. Like when you have a good meal, it's like I'm grateful, but that gratefulness kind of like hits a dead end when you sit there. It's like, well, it's all that I got. No, it's not all that we have as followers of Christ, and knowing that God is creator. Our thankfulness and gratitude should kind of roll up to praise, and blessings that we know that a God who designed and created all of these things gave us good gifts. And I think you're right, like about the narrow-mindedness of it, right? Like that's the creation mandate, right? Right back in Genesis, when God creates the man and the woman, he says that, go, fill, subdue, dominion, explore, make this a better place, create and expand, explore, all of that. That's actually part of God's plan and goodness for us. It's just that they shouldn't be like, in Romans chapter 1, it says that we traded the creator for creation. We wanted the creation more than we wanted the creator. And I think that's when we run into trouble. It's not that God doesn't give good gifts and all of these things. We should look forward to them. And we should, when these things come, we should roll our praises back up to God. And we also know that if they don't come, God is still more than sufficient for us.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's exactly right. I mean, C.S. Lewis, that reminds me of his quote too, what a horrible reality to be filled with gratitude and have nowhere to take it, right? No one to give it to. Something along those lines. Yeah.
Totally. What were some of the things that kind of jumped out at you, Caleb, this last week?
Well, the Four Horsemen.
Oh.
4 Horsemen! I had a chat with the neighbor about, and I found out he was into metal. I used to be into metal music. It reminded me of Metallica. The 4 Horsemen. And then I was like, we just listened to that sermon in church. It was awesome. But the 4 Horsemen of conquest, of war, of
injustice and death.
Yeah. Of famine, or just the basic necessities, while the rich can get richer. And then the pale horse of death. This is what's coming at you. This is coming for everybody. Like, I mean, what a contrast when you think about that compared to what we read in our, in preparation for this coming sermon about the protection and the seal of God. What a beautiful thing to be sealed of God after you've heard about these horsemen, but you don't need to hear about, like, we see this. Maybe we don't see it as much as other people around the world. In fact, I guarantee you we don't. We might be those who, get to, we get our wine still, and we get the luxury goods while others are in need, and maybe that's something we should pay attention to. But the fact is that conquest, war and conflict, famine, plague, death, and economic struggles, these are the present age. These are your life until you die or Christ returns. These are present. And you can have victory over them through Christ, through faith, through a life after this, an age after this, I mean, it's so stunning to me. You think about Jesus, he comes to earth and he ends his life bleeding, crucified, nailed to a cross. And you're going to like, well, there is a life to come, and it's all there. Like Jesus put it all there. He didn't hold on to anything here, you know? Here it was the will and the plan of God, the provision of God until I die. That's my goal. I just got to make it till I die, and then we're getting started. Then we're going. And we got to remember that. Like, we're going to make it to our dying day. We're not going to miss it. We'll make it. And when we die, we're just getting started, you know? There's another age to come. And so that's got to be the filter. You know, we have to see, I think, the things that we hold on to. We have to hold on and think about them in light of the fact that they could get trampled by the horsemen. So better divest of them, or better invest them, or how do we live our lives knowing that these forces are real today?
Well, I think, that's a great question, Caleb. I think it's always keeping our eyes on Jesus and seeing the grace of God and the love. And we talked about the sacrificial love of God a few weeks ago. But I think that's such an antidote. I'm going to use that word, an antidote for the four horsemen, right? Because we get easily caught up in the four horsemen, right? Like strife, like it's I'm going to stand for what my rights or my justice, or this idea of famine and greed and injustice. Tell me, I'm not going to ask you, Caleb, because whatever. I'll just say it for myself.
Yeah, I want to know from you.
Exactly. How strong was the urge for self-preservation and protection in the last 2 years, right? Like we lost our minds and ran after toilet paper, right? Because it was like there's a shortage. And think about that at a global and personal scale of how like there was that temptation to just kind of close up, bunker up, protect yourself. And isn't that kind of the idea of shortage? And into that, I think we look at Christ and what he did and willingness to kind of lay down his life. This is the Philippians chapter 2, right? Like, look at others, count others worthy, if at all possible, live at peace with people, right? Like, there's all this strife and stuff like that. There's that unity. I think some of it with it is like really that idea of living with peaceably, that idea of generosity and living with open hands. There's this idea of hospitality that, our lives are shared with others. And we kind of like push up against the four horsemen. We live differently. Christ lived differently than the world. The world looks like the four horsemen, right? Like survival of the fittest, whoever's the strongest is the top dog. And like you said, Jesus comes as the top dog, but is willing to lay down his life for everyone, right? I'm always stunned at every time demons or Satan is in contact with Jesus, like the demons, like Legion. It's like, oh my gosh, you're like the Son of the God Most High, and they're like begging Jesus, and he comes as ultimately the top dog, but is willing to share all that he has, and he gives and he brings peace. And I think that's a struggle for us. I think that's kind of how we kind of respond to the four horsemen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but one of my questions for you is like, what have you seen to be the prevailing temptation in the face of these horsemen? Like, I mean, I know, so you preach here, obviously, but you're also doing counseling, you're also talking with people, and we all rub shoulders with people and just see the world in general. And I guess you kind of mentioned it, but if you had to like really kind of try and hit the nail on the head, in the light of all that we've seen here in the past couple of years, what is the prevailing temptation? What would you name it?
I think, this actually comes to, I'm starting to think about the next sermon series after Revelation. And one that I'm thinking about is finishing strong, finishing well. And what I mean by that is, I mean by like, as followers of Christ. And a statistic that comes up quite often is that only in the Bible, only 30% of the people finish well.
Okay,
like
yeah,
like Saul, starts great, sidetrack. Solomon starts great, sidetrack. There's just a whole bunch of folks who don't quite finish well. And I think when you say the temptation, if I'm talking about a Christ follower, I think ultimately the greatest temptation is exactly what Satan's doing, taking our eyes off of Jesus. Because if we take our eyes off of Jesus, all of this stuff seems monumental. It's not just one or two things, but it's usually the fact that I've somehow Satan's taken us off the course. It's Paul saying, there's the prize. I strive towards. I'm not looking what's behind. I'm going for the prize to make it my own because Christ has made me his own. And I think sometimes the temptation is all of a sudden all of these stuff is greater than Christ in my life. So then I'm worried about having enough. I'm worried about making sure that my voice is heard. I'm worried about, death that's coming. I'm worried. I'm not saying that those things, we shouldn't be concerned about those things, but they become greater and all of a sudden we lose sight of Jesus. That's, and so maybe I'm still working around that. I'm thinking about that might be the sermon series that kind of comes in the summer, this idea of finishing well. What are the things that take us off course from finishing well?
Right. No, I think, well, you know what? Fantastic. There are people who have been totally derailed, right? And I think finishing well, you can get into a mindset where you're just coasting. That's not finishing well. You gotta, it's gotta be, you gotta keep coming, you gotta keep being renewed, right?
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things we commented in staff meeting about this part 2, in Revelation 6 with the horsemen coming. The horsemen are coming through the world, and they're causing trouble, mostly for the poor and the kind of the downtrodden. The rich might be the conquerors. The rich might be the people who can afford to engage in strife, because they're not the ones on the front lines. The rich are the ones who benefit from economic inequality and famine, and the rich have the means to prolong sickness or death better than others, right? So those who have, not that there's anything wrong with being rich, but a lot of times it's a snare. Being rich with God is great, but being rich without him is not rich at all, really. And you see that on a spiritual level often with people. But when the sixth seal is opened and there was a great earthquake, and the wrath of the Lamb of God is coming, they call on the mountains and rocks to hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. They're not concerned by, and everyone is concerned. They weren't hiding before, but they're hiding now. Something greater than the horseman is here, and it's the Lamb of God. And that's trouble more so than everything else. And I think that's a good reminder, because as difficult as life is in this world because of the horsemen and what they bring, how much more difficult? I mean, you can stand against that, or you can stand against your Maker. And how do you think you'll fare then? It won't be good. So
yeah, I found that was one of the most profound thoughts in this chapter, that the wrath of the Lamb comes, and that we are all going to give account to God, give account before the Lamb. And man, like you said, who can stand? And no matter what we have or don't have, it's not going to mean anything before the Lamb. And I liked how David described it. It's just as you're asking creation to stand up, or protect yourself from the Creator. Right. Like that's just asinine, right? Like all the wealth in the world. Really, it's really gonna get you anywhere. And I think we're gonna deal with that in chapter 17 18 and 19, kind of the fall of Babylon. And I think we talked a little bit about it in staff. I know you and I talked a little bit about it, that idea of, when the fall of Babylon, people mourn because their luxuries and their wealth go along with Babylon. And some of it is like, of course we're going to be sad, but do we lament at the fall of Babylon, or do we sit there and say, yes, come, Lord Jesus, come?
Yeah, totally. No, that's awesome. Probably a great place to wrap up for today. So.
Yes. Well, thank you, McLaurin, for joining us. This is Life here at McLaurin, and you've joined us for Living in the Scriptures Live. Blessings.
Blessings, guys.